Okay, good evening, everyone. I'd like to call tonight's special council meeting to order, please. And as we begin, I wish to acknowledge the Sauk people on whose traditional territory we gather. We recognize and respect our neighboring First Nation government, as well as their historical relationship with the lands that continue to this day. As we look at tonight's agenda, I would ask Council then to approve the agenda with the inclusion of the new business and supplementary information, please. Moved by Councillor Parkinson, seconded by Councillor Pearson. Any questions? See none. All those in favor? Oh, question? Go ahead.
Yeah,
Microphone.
I will get that figured out after 7 years. So I would through to the chair, because we have a series of special meetings planned for the financial, would it be appropriate to set a time limit for budget discussions, plus or minus, because we end up getting to the end or going on another section and another section. So this is the most important job that we do. So
I would agree that I agree with both. I think it is one of the most important things we do, and also the time is important because how much budget can you process?
Exactly.
So I say we target 9 o'clock, 2 hours.
Okay, thank you.
And let's be efficient with our time, and we should have no problem getting through said materials.
Thank you, Chair.
Also remind Council that our procedures allow you to speak for up to 10 minutes on any item on the agenda, but that's 10 minutes total. So if the item is going on and other people are adding in, if you already used your 10 minutes, technically you don't have more time left. So maybe you should be succinct if you have multiple comments to do. So anyway, on that note, I'll call the question on approval of the agenda with supplementary. All those in favor? Opposed? It's carried unanimously. Okay, welcome, Councillor Casper. And then that puts us right into our business tonight, which is the 2018 to 22 5-year financial plan. And we have our materials, so I'll just turn this over to our staff, please, to Mr. Blackhall.
Thank you, Mayor Tate. We're going to go through the slide deck here first, and then we'll get into the actual, sorry, it's hard to see it that way. Then we'll get into the actual budget document itself. So starting with the slides. So the first page here is the breakdown of the total expenditures and sort of by the bylaw area. Okay, these slides are pretty much in the same format that was presented in the January Committee of the Whole meeting, but the numbers have been updated for the revised draft plan. So that's that slide. And here's the operating expenses. So one of the bylaw lines is municipal general expenditures, and that's this 13 million number, and that's how it's broken out by each of the departments and areas like amortization and et cetera, and we'll get into each of those areas as we go through the actual document. And then there's the how do we fund everything. The total bylaw is funded this way, so property taxes 7.6 million, reserve transfers 3.9 million, grants and borrowings 5.5 million, fees and charges 1.7, and sewer fees 1.8. Changes, this was again highlighted in January, but I'll just go over it again. So we have, compared to the 2017 format, building and bylaw are now within the community safety department, which is also fire department and policing. HR, reception, and all the building admin functions are now in its own department. We've got an increase in the parks park staffing number for laborers. We added a new firefighter. Inflation is incorporated enough into the contingency, so it's not like every number is going to increase across the board by 1.5% or whatever. We've got enough within the contingency to do it, so that's why the numbers will look the same across the board for the 5 years in some cases. The presentation of the budget itself has changed, so to try to make it easier, so when you look at the main bylaw page and flip then into the consolidated page, you'll see the actual a line that breaks out how that bylaw number is is calculated. And then from there, you keep going back in the document to see where all those individual numbers come from. And I'll show you on the website right now, we have it's actually called Property Tax Calculator, but it's really the budget consultation document. And I'm going to show you that when we get to the finance section, but you can put in your assessed value, and it will show you your taxes by municipal department, and it also explains what's involved in that department, the key statistics and stuff like that, and what would happen if we decreased funding in that department or increased funding in that department. So. Some of the cost drivers, obviously the growth is quite significant here, and the tax increases over the past years haven't necessarily kept pace. Our service levels are all increasing here, and we'll get into that in each department area. Again, the low taxes historically, and now we're sort of getting caught up. We've managed, as you see, when you look at the consolidated budget page where the tax increase number is, that I've managed to get it down to roughly 2.5% increase from what we had approved for 2018 in the last year 5-year plan was 5.5%. So, and that still would meet our service level demands. Some of the risks, our road maintenance contract is something we're going to have to look at, and we'll need to spend some time on it in 2019, and it's going to, I think, get significantly more costly. DCCs, really, the DCC plan isn't really reflective of the actual roads that are DCC roads. Charters and Beaton really are, roads that are excessively used because of the new development, so I think we need to address that by law. And then we can use some of the DCC funding to address those areas. The Knox project, for example, is a great, project. We like to see these projects, but when we grant the DCCs, it does have an impact on the overall DCCs, and we can't recover it from another developer. So it basically is a cost of the municipality. The wastewater DCC, as you'll see in the reserve sheets when we get there, that it basically runs down to zero in 2021, and the debt keeps going till 2026. So it has to be funded somehow, which in this plan is being funded by sewer reserve transfer, because there's no other source for it unless we increase the fees. Just to update on the staffing, of course, we've addressed right now the planning staff. We're looking at all staffing levels, but that's right now. We did just close on the head of planning and the auxiliary planner. The planner 2 position closes March 31st, I believe. And so anyway, the head of planning, the auxiliary planner both start on April 16th, so that's good. So there isn't a whole large gap, but there's some others we need to look at, and there's other items in the budget that we'll talk about in camera on the staffing level. The QP contract expires at the end of 2018. The reserves, of course, are being used to help keep the tax rate low, but we're also trying to make sure we're putting enough in so it isn't getting drawn down too low, but you'll see when I get to that slide, we'll talk about that. There is overtime because of the service level demands. We are seeing overtime at QP staff was about 64,000 for last year. So it is having an impact, and it does lead to some burnout too. So we want to make sure we're addressing staffing.
Pardon me, Mr. Blackhall. I think
Yes.
there's a couple of questions
Yes.
from members of
Sure.
council. Go ahead,
Through
Councillor
you, Worship.
Parkinson.
Just in regards to the staffing there, the one was the bylaw staff demands are also at risk due to new federal regulations. I was just wondering what that is. What are the new regulations?
So the cannabis regulations.
Okay.
We've got in the budget to hire a new bylaw officer this year, halfway through the year.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yep. And that allows us also to address the hours of the bylaw function.
Right.
If we have a new person in, we can actually have the hours so that they're on, there's a bit of evenings and weekends there as well.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Is there any questions from anyone else on any of the slides so far? Okay. Maybe, Mr. Blackhall,
Yep.
if we can take a pause for questions, maybe after, like, sort of go by section.
Sure.
And then there's
Yeah,
also,
right after I do the risks, right after I do the opportunities, that kind of thing.
Yeah,
You can
and just
answer
a question to council is how do you wish to incorporate public input into this? Because this isn't a committee of the whole, it's a special council, and I sort of missed I grabbed the wrong material package, so I missed public input, but then it's at the beginning, and I think anyone here might have questions during and perhaps after as opposed to at the start. So, some ideas there?
Could we put this on pause and invite public question and comment, and then return, or maybe finish the?
We could, but I think it should be maybe after a certain, like we'll pause for council questions sort of by section, and then maybe see if there's any public questions on that particular section. Maybe that would work, and we can see how that goes. Because although if we do it now, I think you might have people seating might have some questions, but it's more you're going to have more comments as you hear the presentation. So maybe we'll do that and see how that goes. Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Okay. I think we talked about this part. Sewer capacity, obviously we've discussed this at council before, and the budget does have some items in there to address the work that needs to be done. We'll go through the capital budget. That's really where the big dollars are, of course, and that's we'll listen to council's wishes on some projects that are in there and whether some aren't a priority and others maybe are. Grants, we are focusing on making sure we can apply for grants when they do come up. Part of that is someone's got a cell phone going.
Can whoever shut their ringer off?
I'm trying to.
Okay.
There we go.
An example is the gas tax grants that were just announced. Unless we have design-ready projects, we can't apply for those. And there's also, of course, a matching aspect, so we need to have them in the budget as well. Permits and fees, we haven't looked at the fee regulation bylaw for, well, since I've been here, I think, so a long time. So we may need to look at that again. Okay, and now we're getting into the actual components of the budget. So the bylaw itself, so debt servicing, and of course that's our MFA debt for sewer, the building, anything else, trucks. Capital expenditures, so mainly that's our road program is the biggest item in there. Transfers to reserves, so that's, the money we get in, say, for example, gas tax money, we collect it and we put it right into the gas tax reserve, right? Same with casino monies, et cetera. And then the operating expenditures, those are all the various departments, including wastewater. And then now we're into, the total expenses on the budget. And this year it's 20.5 million. Last year was 19.4 million. So an increase of 1.15 million, or almost 6%. And then the changes by the bylaw area. So debt servicing's actually gone down in the budget. Capital spending's gone up by, say, 300,000. Transfers going up by 500, et cetera. And then a reason for the decreases of each of those bylaw areas. So really the building loan is paid off, but we've got a bit more borrowings. Last year we had the road program. We assumed we were going to borrow $1 million for a road program. Then we did the study, came up with a 5-year plan instead. So that had an impact on the comparison of the budget numbers.
Can you go back? Is there
Yes.
any questions from any members of council about that information so far? Go ahead, Councillor Casper. Microphone, please.
How come we didn't have a mortgage burning party? And I just, hopefully during any further discussion, we find out where the $86,000 expenditure for debt retirement is now being spent. In my mind, it should just be an automatic gift back to the taxpayers as far as a reduction is concerned, but that's just a comment.
Yep, thanks for that. You'll see when we go through all the debt when we get into the individual areas of where it's going.
Are there any questions from any members of the public on this section so far? I just want to keep the comments, if possible, contained to the relevant section, and then at the end we can have a general one if there's anything that you missed in any particular section. Okay, thank you.
Okay, so moving along, capital expenditures going up by just under 300,000. The main items in there for this year, 700,000 for the first year of the 5-year road program, roughly 400,000 in total for building improvements. The main part of that is our sprinklers and plumbing within this building, and we've been very fortunate so far that we haven't had something happen. Rob could explain further, but it's just a ticking time bomb, basically. The fire department has a new water tender truck. The council's already approved that RFP. The RFP's closed. They're going to be bringing that forward on Monday night for discussion. Washroom, electric car stations, etc. You'll see the more when we get into it.
So just on that note, sorry to cut you off there. In terms of the washroom and the car charging station, council that's where we'll give more direction on our options and the like, because we had sort of discussed it and then took it away to ponder a bit more.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah,
So
once I go through the overview slides, then we get into the actual pages with the numbers on them and all the detailed lines, and that's where we really would like some feedback on the projects. Then this is just a highlight of the changes to the reserve funds. Really nothing out of the ordinary there, so we're always putting money in, obviously, to them. We try to keep the capital asset replacement reserve funded at an appropriate level, because really that should be our rainy day fund for capital asset needs, like this building, for example. And then now we're going to get into each of the individual operating departments. The overall change for other municipal purposes, the bylaw line is just under 500,000. The council area line item, well, department in a sense, has gone up by about just 50,000. You can see the main increases for that. The CRD Arts Development Services that was asked to put in something is the bulk of that at just over 30,000. CAO's office change is actually a decrease. We decreased the amount of the contingency fund, the amount of the legal expenditures. There's still adequate amounts in there. And long-term plans, there's an actual increase in there, but overall there's a decrease in that department. Corporate services, overall decrease. Really this is because of we moved the bylaw department into community safety, and HR reception and building maintenance costs are all now in their own department. So corporate services now is really just corporate services, so the corporate officer and the two assistants, and the deputy corporate officer. So. And then the line department below that, HR, reception and office admins, that's the new area. So basically 250 was pulled out of last year's line and moved into its own line. So every department that needs to have an allocation to the sewer fund has an allocation, and we do track. I track all invoice run by amounts that are from every department, so parks ones, wastewater ones. We've increased over 70% in the finance department after we brought parks and wastewater in-house. So that's the increased workload we have, not to mention the payroll side of it, all the others, right? So, but there's an increase in every department, corporate services, CAO's office, everything. Financial services department change, just under 40,000. We're adding a new financial services clerk. What I just had mentioned is one of the reasons why. I've been doing 2 jobs at least for 2016, so it's time to bring a manager in again so I can start actually doing some more bigger important things. And that I've got slated for September. Not that that's not important, but just that I don't have time to just do there's a lot of improvements that can be done and stuff to present stuff better for you guys and the public, and you can't do that when you're busy day to day just on other things. So that I'm on vacation as soon as we're done with tax season and everything, and so we're thinking September would be a good time to bring a new person on there. Development services, oddly, it didn't change much at all, but there has been some changes in there, and we'll get to that in that department. But building department moved into community safety, but everything else sort of offset it almost evenly, which is odd, but this is the way it worked out. Community safety, $500,000 increase. Again, it took on the building department, took on the bylaw department. We have the new IAFF agreement, which didn't really itself add anything, but that we hired the new firefighters. So that's it. Amortization doesn't have a cash impact, but it goes up every time we add assets, of course. And sewer operations, we'll get to the sewer budget here, but it's gone up, and we will get to why in a bit. So on to the funding sources, property taxes, $7.6 million in this budget, which is an increase of 2.5%. Non-market change is adding approximately $263,000. That could change still because we don't have the final numbers yet from BC assessment, but that's what we're estimating. The average, if it's a 2.5% increase that we land on, that would result in an average property tax increase of $46 based on an average assessed value. And for 2018, a 1% increase represents $71,000, which is not a lot of money, but it is a lot of money, but for a budget of $20 million, it doesn't add much. Sewer parcel taxes, $1.8 million. The parcel tax will address when we get into the sewer budget, and we do have need to look at that and some financing within the sewer fund. And it doesn't have to come from a parcel tax increase, but that's just one way it could come from. It could come from sewer generation charges. It could come from looking at the water-based billing system instead, which would make it more fair on property owners that are maybe paying too much compared to the suites, et cetera. So. Other sources, $5.5 million. We're increasing borrowings. That's kind of the increase in there, $355,000. So fees and charges. The building permit fees are maybe the only one we are seeing a very significant increase in the amount of workload there, and the budget reflects that. So assuming, we've also got in the budget to hire, we've already posted the building official 3, which is the plan checker type person. So this should all speed along things and actually make the revenue numbers higher and smoother. So. And transfers, I already mentioned about, but there's nothing really there. Okay, I'm going to just do a high-level overview of the engineering, parks, and wastewater, but they are both engineering and wastewater staff are here, and will field the questions and do any more details that you may have. So I'm just going to do a high level first here.
Sure. Before you do that, we'll just pause for any comments. So any questions from members of council on the presentation so far? Okay. Is there any comments or questions from members of the public on that first section?
Hi, it's Britt Santowski from 2206 Church Road. And just one thing jumped out at me there, and that is just the washroom for the John Phillips Memorial Park. Is that, I always mix up my parks. That's the one just outside here. Yeah. The other one has been out of service for a year. So I'm just thinking, if you can't maintain one, why would you even consider building a second one? So,
and that's a very valid point that was brought forward in the staff report. So I think it's something that council received the information and then through this process, we can finalize exactly what we want to do there. So thank you for that. Anything else from anyone on that first section? Okay, thank you, Mr. Blackhall, into engineering.
Okay, so engineering department, council wanted us to break out, or add in the detailed lines. So instead of it saying rainwater management now, it actually has the projects that are going to be worked on. Same goes with road. There was one road maintenance program or something. That's every single project now is broken out on its own, parks included, and you'll see that when we get there. So for 2018, the rainwater management program has these two projects, one of which was a carryover from last year of 150, which the Souk River Road drainage had 150 carried over, so it's 100 of new money, and the Kennedy Street South drainage. And then 2019, et cetera. And you'll see these on the capital sheets when we go through them. So that's the Grant Road drainage and the through stream cross culvert replacements. And again, Brian is here and can answer all the questions if you have on those. Then we've got a page for each of the 5 years of the road program. And this is based on the report that already came to council and was the basis for us going forward with the tender and all, et cetera. But it does show each of the roads that will be worked on in those 5 years. So I'll just go through that, and you can save your questions for that for Brian when he's up. And then quick overview on the parks. And the public space enhancement program. So that was the one that kind of just looked like, for a better word, a slush fund, which it wasn't, but without you guys and the public seeing what the actual projects are, it kind of looks that way. So we listed out the actual projects. And so for 2018, Broom Hill Park equipment replacement, Whiff and Spit repairs, Demamio Creek pedestrian crossing feasibility study. That's a line on its own within the parks. Pirate ship upgrades. Rob can speak to this one. Pirate. Furwood Park Trail connection. John Phillips Memorial Park bathroom. This will be one, of course, that we'll want to spend some time talking about. That one actually, staff estimate would be much closer to 200,000. So, but we'll get there when we get there. Murray Road staircase had a budget for 75,000, of course, again for this year. We are bringing a report forward on Monday night to talk about the recent tender. Possession Point, so access to water, a project there. And then there's a line also that said Parks Department equipment. So this provides a breakdown of what that equipment is. It's mainly, I think, a truck and some mowers, etc. Whiff and Spit study. These are all things that we can get grant funding for too. A lot of cases, asset management grants. And then into the 2019 projects, the same kind of idea. So we'll save that for when we get into the actual capital projects pages. But you can, just so you know, that's all detailed on these slides by project and by year. Okay, and then quick overview on the sewer, and Dan is here to answer all the. Sorry, time for a pause.
Let's just do a pause for either questions or applause. Any questions? So, in terms of discussing things like the washrooms, for example, how then will council provide the direction on which washroom per se we want to do? Like, how is staff looking to receive that? Are you looking? Is that going to come at a like we're allocating X amount of dollars, and then at a later council meeting we'll dive into it then, and it's just to have the monies there? Or as we go through this, are you looking for us to approve, yes, we want this type of washroom or that type of washroom or this type of option? Like, how do we do this?
Thanks, Your Worship. No, we'll when we get into the document with all the numbers on it and the pages of the capital projects, we're looking just for, is this does council agree these are the priority projects and the rough dollars involved? And then we bring a report back saying, here's what we're going to do with this one particular project. We've had a better look at it. The real, more refined cost number is X. Say
Okay.
the washroom, for example, for 100 grand, you might be able to get this. For 200, you might be able to get that.
Okay,
But-
so this is just to allocate those funds, but in terms of what it is, that'll then be
That's
at a
correct.
later date. So here's where it's more high level. Do you want to wash them or not? Yes, then put in those funds. No, we'll
That's
take
correct.
it out
Yeah.
type of thing.
Yeah, and I highlight the washroom one just because after, we had it in the budget at 100, but really from what we understand council wanted to see based on the last discussion, it likely is going to cost more than that. So
That's if we go with a self-cleaning model. So then at that point, we could do a budget amendment if we feel that that model is the one
Correct.
that we want. However, if council so chooses to do a pit toilet, say in 3 locations and it's less,
Yep.
then we're just coming in under budget.
that's correct.
Okay.
Yeah, we could actually do it by, say there's a project that we aren't going to do, it would be a transfer within the capital fund of the extra money needed. Or we could look at adding now, if we know council really wants it to be, instead of, say, a vault type, pit type toilet, instead would like to see actual running water in there, then we know it's going to cost more than 100,000. And you're looking probably closer to 200,000 where it's all said and done. So,
Okay.
yep.
So
So we will get to those.
Okay. Any questions on this section so far? The development services, the parks? Okay. Go ahead, Councillor Casper.
Yeah, just one general question. So are you going to, later on in the discussions, I don't know if it's going to happen tonight or tomorrow night, have the criteria in which additional staff are required, let's say? Because I was taken aback by bylaw enforcement, an additional person to enforce a federally regulated law, which is not municipal responsibility. So, my guess is that are we going to have a bylaw enforcement officer running around and making sure that people don't have more than 4 pot plants in visibility from the street? I sure hope that that's not the case, because that's absolutely ridiculous. The RCMP are already saying nationwide they're going to need more police officers to deal with this. So I'm thinking, well, why would we turn around and hire somebody when the RCMP are going to come knocking at our door and asking for more people? So, I just want to make sure that with all these wants, that it's really substantiated. And, and I appreciate all the work you've done, believe you me. This is better than what we've had for a while. So I really do appreciate it. I think you've done a great job here in laying out where the money's going to be spent and how it's going to be spent, because that's been the thing that we haven't had for almost 3 years. Okay, so I really appreciate it. But I just don't want to see us then get caught in a crossfire as to, the Parks Department wants to spend $170,000 more this year in salaries, when the presentation says we're going to hire additional seasonal workers. Well, seasonal means to me it's part-time work. So, I just need to eventually have more information on those details, and I know we'll get it. So, but otherwise, I think what you've done is great. I really appreciate it truly, and I think other members of council feel the same way. So,
No, that's good. I agree with you on the cannabis piece, Councillor Casper. But yes, I think this is a good start. Any questions from members of the public on this first section? Or not the first section, second section, engineering and parks. Parks. Go ahead.
Cam
We just require your name and
McIntyre,
address.
2012 Penang Road. With respect to the parks, the lawnmowers, the additional lawnmowers indicated was theft. Have we lost lawnmowers to theft? Or is that something
That's what
that
I
might happen that we might have to pay for?
Your Worship, through to the member of the public, I'm not aware of any theft, and I'm not too sure where that information is coming
here.
from.
It's in here.
Is it in there?
I have
In
it
the
highlighted.
presentation.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. My apologies, I'm not familiar with it. I don't believe we've had any theft of a lawnmower. We have had equipment thefts with
No,
regards to
I was
weed
speaking about lawnmowers.
eaters, but I'm not aware of lawnmowers.
Yes.
Sorry, and just to add, we have had some theft from the vehicles. Whether it was a lawnmower, I'm not exactly sure. The staff member who contributed to the slides is unavailable tonight, but Rob would be the best to, Mr. Howitt, the best to answer parks-related questions, and if we have more for tomorrow night, we can perhaps ask that person to be here.
Okay.
Yeah.
'Cause it
Okay,
looks
what
like-
we'll do is, if we can't answer, maybe if staff can just note the outstanding question, and then we can just sort of add that as a follow-up piece.
Thank you. It's a want or a need is my concern.
Whether the lawnmower is a
Another
want?
lawnmower, is it just purely a want or
Right.
is it needed?
Okay, yeah, and that's
Thank you.
where, we can get that clarity. Thank you.
Sounds like a want.
Other questions or comments?
Herb Haldane, 3118C Otter Point Road. It came up some time ago that there's rental money that comes in from people storing stuff down at the Public Works yard. Is there a line item in here where that money goes, or is there a fund, or?
I don't know that we don't have any leases in place down there anymore. We have a
Big
few.
cranes down there with 3 or 4 vehicles as well as storage right now, so.
Okay,
Yeah.
go to Mr.
Yep.
Blackwell.
Thanks, Your Worship. It's not big enough to warrant its own light item. It would just go in other revenues. It's 100 and something a month, just over $100 a month, I believe.
So can anybody store stuff down there for 100 and something a month?
No?
We've never been approached by anyone else, other than we did have a company that was interested in leasing space down there.
So do we have a policy, or do we have anything in place for being able to apply for this? I have a lot of equipment.
We lease,
I'd love to have that.
we do lease space, obviously, under auspices of a highways use permit. We've got 2 patios that are highways use permits that should perhaps be long-term lease agreements instead, that kind of thing. The person that's in there is a volunteer fireman, and the arrangement was that by having that equipment there, it enabled him to actually, I think if the fire chief was here, he'd be able to explain it a lot better than me, but it's enabling him to work the hours that are needed a little easier than having all the stuff stored somewhere else in town, I think it was. But he can perhaps answer that on Monday night.
We can make a note of that for follow-up, but generally, no, at this time, there's no space for lease down there.
No.
So it's not available to everybody, just to volunteers?
No, if you would like to lease it for
Yeah.
some money, I'll be willing to discuss.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
I would just put in a formal letter then, just letting us know what you're looking to lease and for how long and what sort of equipment, and then council can receive that and consider it.
No, perfect. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Ellen Norris, 5526 Sioux Road. I too wanted to comment on the parks. Our budget for parks is now $638,000, I believe, something to that effect. And we don't have any space leased down there anymore. We used to have a rental income. And now we're looking for more equipment. And today I noticed that there was also a flagger needed for Parks Works on Sioux Road, which is a highway, yet we're paying for a flagger and maintenance on Sioux Road.
Really?
Yes, in downtown and the roundabout and that piece in there. So I guess my question is, why are we doing that? We've lost the revenue, and now our parks have increased from our parks costs have increased from, I believe 2 years ago it was $130,000 to now $638,000, and we don't have any income. I think that that's really bad planning. And now to also the flagger, where does that go? Is that another employee that we have to have a flagger there while they're doing work?
Could the flagger have been used for were the banners maybe changed out today? Was that?
Nope, they were weeding.
Weeding? I don't know. Maybe
Yeah.
Mr. Howitt can comment.
Your Worship, the only thing I can think it is we have we have 2 parks people on staff right now with an auxiliary member as well. One may have been flagging for somebody that was doing work. within the boulevard of Highway 14 or in the roundabout, which we are responsible for. But without being there, I'm not sure. But we do not have an employee who is a flagger. We have employees down in the parks function that have their flagging ticket that can flag.
Okay. Thank you.
Go ahead, Mr. Howard.
Just one other thing, Your Worship, with regards to the lawnmower theft. My apologies for not reading the slide out of the deck. It was allocated, or funding was allocated in case of theft, not due to theft. We haven't had a theft of a lawnmower.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Question to follow up, is that because our deductible, our premium deductible exceeds the cost of an actual lawnmower? Is that the rationale?
That's correct.
Okay, so that's the reason, right?
Well, if a push mower wouldn't be more than $500, would it? A commercial grade push.
So if I may, just to follow up on that, maybe in the explanation note on something like that, that we actually put that as a rationale, that it's because of the insurance policies and the deductible, it's cheaper to buy a new lawnmower than to try to collect the insurance because of what you got to pay for the deductible.
Oh, it's working again. Sorry.
There can only be 3 on at once, so that was why.
No. Through your worship, some of the mowers are the small ones, and the other ones, the bigger ones that we need, of course, are more expensive, and those, the deductible may be a good use there. But the push mowers, yes, no, they're not worth it. But the biggest ticket item in that capital need was actually a truck, so that was the big one. But we'll get to that department along the way. So we're on to the sewer area, and again, this is just a very brief overview, and Dan is here, the sewer manager, to answer some questions if you have. From a capital perspective, which is really what the focus is this year, we've got critical parts inventory, and Dan can go through the list on that. The centrifuge, not only just the centrifuge, but you can see the other components. And we've gone conservative on the numbers just in case. We will tighten them up as we go through it, and if council agrees with this being a priority. Wet well, it says correctly on this slide, thank you. This is for I believe, the Bell Vista station, correct? Okay. We do need another wet well there and some pumps. There's issues where that station is at overflow and operators getting called out unnecessarily. So it's tied in a bit with the Phillips Road lift station, but this one we're having Stantec look at and help design a better solution there. We've got obviously an infiltration problem, so we are looking at that. You've already been made aware of that, so I'll just go through this. These slides, I can sort of read it here. So the capital projects, again, broken out by area. So the what used to be kind of a traditional area in the sewer budget, and it was about 100 or so thousand. It's 200,000 in here now, and that's mainly just the critical parts inventory is the key item in here, which is 100. And then we get into the more traditional type real capital projects in here. And Dan will speak a bit more to this, but again, the centrifuge being a big one. And what else do we have in here? The 520-ish was, biosolids. Nope, different one. Anyway, I'll let Dan speak to that because he's the expert. And then these are the more minor capital projects. So all in all, it's $1.4 million. It's a significant expenditure and much higher than we've gone through in the past. It's almost that same number next year. and then it starts tapering off, but this is getting caught up on things. The system's 12 years old now, and there are a lot of things that need to be addressed in it, and Dan will explain. But the basic things are like electrical is 12 years old, and there's a lot of electrical components and stuff involved in this, and none of us probably have or maybe we do, a 12-year-old computer, but that's the kind of analogy. And that's it for the slides. So maybe pause here on this after the sewer stuff.
So just a question, council had wanted a sewer capacity study done, and I understand it was going to take place when the water infiltration and the manholes were replaced or repaired, and then that study would take place. Is that been budgeted for, the study? Is that not a capital item?
Yeah, it's actually, we've moved that out to 2019 or 2020 here. To 2020 until we have the infiltration issues solved. No use going and doing flow monitoring if we have a bunch of infiltration coming in, and it's going to skew the numbers. So once we can identify all the infiltration, get it repaired, then we can go ahead with the flow monitoring.
Okay, I think that's a very important part just with the timelines, because I know some of the comments that I heard around this table was in terms of expansion or adding to the SSA. If we don't have a grasp on where we're currently sitting, how can we comfortably add or expand? So that's, I think, just something to be mindful, but understanding that this repair work has to be done and it's going to take some time. So that was that. The other one, I think, was it last year that we looked at the centrifuge replacement, and then because of questions or maybe the season, it sort of got repaired and made good to get us through the season, but then obviously it's still due for replacement, so that's why we're seeing it now.
Yeah, that's exactly it. We got it operational to this point. It's running long hours, but it is operational and we are keeping it running. However, we have to look at a long-term solution for it, and not just the centrifuge itself, but the pumps, the sludge pumps, the piping, the polymer delivery system. And there are savings in the polymer delivery system that we'd look at. We're going from 45-gallon drums to a bulk system, so bulk delivery gets it away from the issue of operators moving 450-pound barrels around to a better delivery system.
Okay. Other questions from council on the sewer section? Go ahead, Councillor Pearson.
Yes, through the chair to the director of the sewer operation. When we did all that presentation last year, wasn't the centrifuge decision put off until after we did the water infiltration? Like, wasn't that all part of it, like the capacity? Wasn't it all? I remember seeing a presentation by somebody here one night, and I think that it was you need to solve the infiltration problem first, and then the capacity. The centrifuge that we had was adequate for our current operation, and then it was tied together. Like, so we first had to do that, get the infiltration fixed the way I remember it, then the capacity, and the recommendation, if I remember correctly, was if you decided to expand, then you needed the bigger centrifuge. So I guess that's kind of my recollection.
Through the chair. Yeah, actually, the infiltration is not the biggest issue with the centrifuge. It's actually the production of biosolids, or production of sludge to create the biosolids. So with the more people moving into town, the more amount of sewage we're receiving, more sludge we're receiving that we have to dewater and create biosolids. Okay. So the centrifuge that we have today, my understanding is it was set for about 10-year cycle. We're into our 12th year, so we're looking at upsizing it to be able to handle whatever we're going to be bringing in the near future. Our engineers are going to be working on doing a study to find out what do we need, how big do we need to go, and based on population growth studies and stuff like that. So we'll be bringing it back. The number that we've put there is a high-level number. We had to come up with a number to put it in there so that you guys have an idea to look at it. When we come down to it, the price may be lower, but I can't say that until we've actually looked at the centrifuge. It's a lot bigger. Fitting it into the room may be an issue, and that's why we put in a budget to be able to handle moving or increasing the size of the room there.
Does that answer your question, Councillor Pearson, or do you have a
Yeah,
follow-up?
I think it's kind of getting me sort of, refreshing my memory, because I saw that number in this, and it seemed like we were going to be able to, I thought the price was like 300,000 or 350,000 at the start of this council term for a centrifuge, or somewhere in that
Through
neighborhood.
the chair. Yeah, it's actually, a centrifuge is about $350,000, the centrifuge alone. But we're looking at sludge pumps, we're looking at the polymer delivery system, we're looking at if we need to increase the size of the building and the piping. We have one flaw in the system, I think, where we don't have a valve between our digesters and our building itself. So we want to make sure that gets captured so that if something was to happen to the piping, we could actually shut the flow off.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah,
Do you have a
I think
follow-up? Another?
yeah, okay. So this is not, and I haven't looked in deeper into the line item. So if the line item says 750,000, it's for a complete engineered project. So we would get a report. In principle, we're saying you're predicting potentially another $750,000 increase or improvements to the system, but we haven't got an engineering report. And okay, so this is just sort of, okay, something to be prepared for, whether it's 2018, 19, or so. Okay, thank you.
Councillor Casper?
Just a couple of things. Council also gave direction last year that we wanted Stantec to do a fairly detailed analysis on the RFP that was previously requested, and that just didn't seem to materialize. And then we were advised that route wasn't taken because corrective measures and tweaking of the system and running less hours put less strain on the device in question. My question is that how many breakdowns have we had with the centrifuge during the past year, and how much costs have been associated with that? Through you.
Through the chair, Councillor Casper. We have not had a breakdown. We've been proactive on doing the repairs and maintenance on it, and we haven't had a breakdown yet. We're now running 40 to 60 hours a week on that centrifuge.
So I guess just to follow up, because I think it's critical information, if we're going to increase the size of a centrifuge, and you can go as high as 20 cubic meters per hour in processing it. There's a wide range, and I think our device is around 4 or 5 cubic meters per hour. It's a smaller device. What are the real significant changes that have occurred? Is it just the way we operate? Is it because of this huge, massive increase in population and users in the system? I think we got to get a handle as to why we're actually wanting to go a certain route, buy a bigger machine, when we truly don't know what our final outcome is as far as capacity for the treatment plant and our overall system. Maybe we'd be better off having 2 smaller devices or 1 large device. I don't know, and I would actually probably be more in favor of getting a truly independent engineering analysis from some people who are actually in the business of doing this sort of stuff. And there are a number of qualified engineers in the Lower Mainland and elsewhere, and even in Victoria, that could do something for us. So, I'm not turning against doing it. I just think that if it isn't mandatory and if it isn't required because it's not breaking down, then we've managed. These machines can last 30 years. All right? They can. And I'll guarantee you there are people in the offing who run other treatment plants. If they heard that the district was getting rid of this centrifuge, they'd be all over us to buy it because they are reliable and they work. So, that's one thing. And there are smaller treatment plants on the island and elsewhere that still make use of these types of centrifuges that we have.
Any comment back at all?
Thank you, Your Worship. Through to Councillor Casper. As Dan Skidmore alluded to earlier, the centrifuge was rated for about 10, 12-year lifespan. We are there now. What we have now is we're asking our engineering firm, Stantec, to look at the biosolids process as an overall, just not the centrifuge, but the whole working of it, to see what we can get in there in the way of a size of a centrifuge that will work less, give us a little more life expectancy of the new one. It also looking at the ability to have a better and drier product at the end to reduce our trucking and hauling costs and our tipping fees. We are also looking at the biosolids, correct me if I'm wrong on the vernacular here, where we do a little bit of a plant upgrading, because Dan says we don't have a valve between the tubs and the centrifuge room, and if that ever goes, we've got no way to shut it off. So we've got to look at that, because if that ever went, we have a real problem. But it's the overall issue of allowing for the next 10 to 15 years to run operationally clean and operationally safe and operationally inexpensive. There will be a savings we consider with a newer centrifuge. What those savings would be, we can't calculate at this point in time, but an engineering proposal put forward will be able to tell us a little bit more about that. But before we do anything, we've got to get the I&I under control, which is the water inundation, which we're going through right now. When we get the water inundation dealt with, we'll be able to do some cammering as well, which is in the budget, or is proposed to be in the budget. From there, and then once we get that under control, we can do a true capacity study. We have some numbers with capacity, but we just want to have the study done to be able to prove those numbers.
So my understanding, just maybe correct me if I'm wrong, a centrifuge is it spins water out of solids, and so at the end of the day, the more water that's out, the lighter it is, and then the lighter it is, because we pay tipping by weight at Heartland, and I think the rates are always continually going up. So the less, obviously, the lighter it is, the less we pay to haul it and to dispose of it. I think at some point with the core area on their treatment, they are going to be treating their biosolids, and then any biosolids that come from Souk would then feed into their treatment, and it'll turn into some form of ash, is my understanding. So that's where I think for now you've managed to keep it going to spin out the water, but with all this excess or unanticipated additional water, is it not putting more strain on it because it's spinning more, or it's just taking more water that it has to spin out that it may not have been, like, in addition to the extra solids that is coming from growth or from or from everything in population growth, there's that in addition to an excess of stormwater that's entering into the system, so then it's working harder to spin all this water out.
Your Worship, no, not necessarily. The biosolids are the sludge is the sludge. The amount of water coming in actually dilutes our plant, so it creates more of an issue that way.
Okay.
The biosolids themselves do have to be dried, like you were saying, but it's not necessarily more flow causing an issue with the biosolids.
Okay, so this added water that's entering in is not impacting the centrifuge per
Not
se?
necessarily. It's more, the water coming in is more of an issue with process.
I see, okay.
So the actual process with the biosolids as opposed to the biosolids themselves. The dewatering, we want to run a centrifuge at approximately 20 to 30 hours per week, not pushing it 40 to 60 hours a week. It's
Got
hard
it.
on equipment.
Okay. Maybe at some point, maybe it'll be helpful if I've been to the plant before, but now that I understand what the components are a bit more, it may be helpful just to see it at some point, and maybe other members of council might, now that we know what these different things do in a different way, just for curious, just it puts the visual, well, just so you understand the mechanics of that and how it works from that mechanical perspective on a visual basis. Okay, that makes sense. Questions from other members of council about the sewer? Thank you for the very thorough report. I really appreciate that and all the work you're doing at the plant. Well, I'm just asking the other members of council if there's anything here. Okay. Members of the public have questions about the sewer section here.
John Reynolds. And this question goes to Dan.
Okay, direct your comment to me, your question to
sorry.
me, though, as
Sorry.
chair, and I'll field it back to staff.
Okay. Page 79 of the 85 on the critical parts inventory, is there a split out or a detailed list of the critical parts?
Okay, so the question to Mr. Skidmore or to Mr. Howard in that department is just how are the critical parts inventory determined?
Through you, Chair. At this point, right now, we are working on a critical inventory, which will include VFDs, pumps, and motors. A motor or a pump right now, we could look at up to 6 weeks on return getting it back. So we want to have something on hand in case something lets go to be able to get it back.
Okay. Now, on page 80 of 85, there is one question, and it's due to the extension of the existing building, and why is that necessary?
Okay, so we did have that, we did hear that it may be necessary to accommodate a different form of equipment that might come in as well as the valve. Maybe Mr. Skidmore, if you could elaborate a bit on that.
Speaking with Stantec, we had them down having a look at it. Some of the sizes of centrifuges would not fit in that room with the size. Or if they may be coming back, as Councillor Casper had said, with a second-sized centrifuge the same size. We need the room in that. Now that we have a biosolids bin within the room, there's not a lot of room to move around.
Okay.
Okay, but what we could expect from this going forward, Mr. Reynolds, is as our director or acting CAO had outlined that when these items, like they're being placed in here is a budget so that we can plan for them. And then as we go ahead, there would be a more thorough staff report that would then come to council at an open meeting for further discussion and dialogue. And then here's what the findings are, here's what we're seeing market prices look for and the like. And there would always be opportunity to comment further as we get into that detail.
Okay. Thanks. Page 81 of 85 there, you're talking about a third pump. Has there been any thought given to the brand of that pump?
Through the chair. No, we have not. At this point, Stantec will be doing a review on the actual pumping itself, and we'll be looking at the pumps at that point.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you for your questions. Are there other members of the public that have questions on this sewer section here?
Ellen Lors, 5526 Hook Road. I had some questions in regard to, since we've taken over the sewer system, and I see this $1.4 million for for the sewer work now increase. How does that compare with if we still had EPCOR running? How does that compare?
Maybe I'll turn that to Mr. Blackhall. Like if we were still in, let's say, the EPCOR agreement that we had with the cost of living increases that were added to it, do you have any sense comparatively on what that would look like?
Your Worship, I don't know if we had the EPCOR contract go that far out on the planned. Because the plant now is 12 years old, these are items that are coming up. There wasn't a large enough reserve set aside to pay for these items, but they were items that aren't unexpected to happen after the life runs out of these assets. So
if we had, like, let's say we were still in an EPCOR agreement, let's say it was for 10 years and not for 5, just in theory, under the terms of that agreement, though, like, we would have to have paid for these plus a management fee on top of that, and then there was something else I understand. Like, we would have paid for this anyway, right? And then we also would have paid them a management fee. I think it was 15% on
Yep.
top of everything that we did, plus the ongoing operating and maintenance of the system.
Yes, Your Worship. The actual, other than the, bringing an operation like wastewater in-house has an impact on the whole organization. It's not just as simple as a plug and play. It impacts everyone and obviously financial stuff, the invoices maybe that EPCOR had being paid out of some office in Edmonton. That, there's a lot of that stuff that impacts. But overall, I'll let the wastewater manager speak to this, because I believe overall on the operating side there is a savings from having it in-house. So I'll hand it over.
Thank you, Your Worship. There was a savings, and we're not really sure what the savings were. We think it was in the realm of $100,000, just based on the savings from the management fees. And whatever saving we had, we didn't put into a separate account saying it's savings from the wastewater management plant. We put back into renewing and rejuvenating the system, like doing bearings on blowers, and like Dan can probably explain it better than I can. But we were able to save just from getting away from the 17% management fees on most of the works that our own operators have completed.
Councillor Casper, I'll turn to you, as I know you did a lot of the work when we did the transition, if you can elaborate.
So just to put it in perspective, with the old contract, EPCOR absorbed any minor capital maintenance items or related maintenance items that had a capital expenditure of $5,000 and under. That was included within the contract. Anything over $5,000 was the responsibility of the district. So over a 5-year period, there was a fairly extensive amount of larger capital expenditures that the district paid over and above the general operating contract. The operating contract had a fixed rate on labor, with the exception of inflation and collective agreements. It had a rate that was adjustable for all other components, which include heat, the lighting, like the electricity, any water consumption that happened at the location, the chemicals that were used. They were all subject to market conditions and overall use. So if it was deemed by the contractor that more things were needed and there were more expenses by way of trucking fees, Heartland landfill fees for dumping sludge, the district had to pay those increases every year, or as those increases occur. That was built into the Schedule A of the contract. So yes, there were some safeguards. They did have fixed costs, but then those were still subject to change annually, and in most of the years it went up. So you've got to put it in perspective. When the contract was originally let in 2005, our cost for the operations with EPCOR was $495,000. Okay, call it $500,000. By the time we had finished the contract with them in 2015, those costs were well over $1 million. So in the space of 10 years, the contract with them doubled. That's what happened. And so what happened, though, in order to keep the rates low, the rates have never really adjusted that much for parcel tax or these fees. And we've fallen by the wayside on some of the capital projects that should have been done that are on a major scale. And so I can see, the validity in seeing these things move forward. There was a plan done by the district and Stantec in 2011, and it actually had a series of schedule of capital works that should be done over the next 10 years. Some of those projects were in fact deferred for whatever reason, I don't know. okay? I don't know if it was of council decisions or not. I really I can't speak to that because I can't remember. But I will say that there is some validity in a lot of this stuff here. It's how we pay for it, which is another thing.
Right.
So anyway, sorry to be so long.
And in response to that too, I'd say that we still have the same situation as far as trucking and dumping fees. We still have that same situation because fuel costs and all that sort of thing. So, but there was discussion at one time too of using the sludge and putting it on the land next to, because we own that land. And I know there was discussion that CRD didn't want to because there might be chemicals, blah, blah. But that is changing. That mindset is changing. So I think it's something that we should be looking at because you could be drying it and using it there, planting trees or things that will absorb.
Just in response to that, Ms. Lurs, having talked to a number of proprietors, and then at the CRD, I chair the Integrated Resource Management Advisory Committee that looks into this. The challenge with Souk is not enough feedstock. We just don't produce enough. If we could guarantee that we could have all of the waste in the entire CRD trucked to us, it may be, then we could actually have a model that would do that. But that was what the board ran into, is that right now, not all the waste that is produced in this region goes to Heartland. Some of it's trucked to the mainland, some of it's trucked to Washington. There isn't enough food, there isn't enough organics, biosolids, or waste in the region to have that technology in place yet at a way that in a means that's affordable. So if Souk wanted to do our own, we don't produce enough.
Well, I find that a little. Yeah. I'm not sure. Being a farmer, there's no problem dealing with little or lots. Yeah. And another question I had too, or did Councillor Pearson? Another question was the Prestige lift station pump upgrade, estimated at $30,000. Now, what is the percentage that the district is paying towards that Prestige lift pump?
Do we have an answer on that? On the lift station, like, do we pay the lot, or does this part of it go back to the landowner there?
Another comment too, while you're finding that, was the comment made by Brent about the water use, using the water use model rather than the per property or per household. Pardon me? And it makes more sense because you have the responsibility goes on to the land owner to be more responsible with their use as well. So I think it makes more sense to do that. I think it's a more responsible way to do that rather than taxing everybody for somebody who is not being very careful.
Okay, back to Mr. Skidmore on the answer there.
Through your worship, the Prestige pump upgrade is not actually an item there. We actually found out that we were able to adjust the impellers in there and create better flow. So it's not a requirement. If you look in my documents that shows across the line, it shows no value through there. So I should have taken that out. That was a typo by myself.
And still through the mayor,
you can see
what's the percentage that the district pays for looking after that? Where's the responsibility? I'd asked that question a long time ago, and I did get an answer, but I forget what it was.
Like, who looks after the lift stations?
Who looks after that lift station? It's attached to their building.
Mr. Howard?
Thank you, Your Worship. The district looks after, excuse me, looks after the lift station at Mariner.
At the
Prestige, I should say.
So we look after all the lift stations.
We were responsible for all the lift stations, yes.
Okay, we look after all of them.
And the charges to the district, or to Prestige for the use of the sewer there.
So then they pay a certain amount, Mr. Blackhole?
Yes, Your Worship. They do pay a sizable fee for the use of the system. And if we go to a water-based system, that may even go up. We don't, it's hard to tell right now, but they are paying for the use of the sewer generation charges. So, yeah, it's quite a large
Yeah, they
amount.
wouldn't pay what a normal resident in Suit pays. They would pay a commercial amount.
I understand,
for that.
but
Yeah.
the district also pays a portion of that as well because it's on our property as well.
That's the agreement.
I just wanted to know
Yeah.
what the percentage was, what that we're paying versus Prestige. I think that's it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Pearson, did you have a comment or question?
Yeah, just a couple of comments through the chair. In general, I think that to suggest that we go to a different funding model raises alarm bells with me, particularly when we're talking about water usage. I support the water usage conservation, but I think that the public voted when the sewer parcel tax went in, and that's the funding model that we use. A revamp or a restudy of the entire sewer system would have to take place in a public discussion, I think, before we change that funding model. Because I think that people who have vacant lots and vacant properties would get off scot-free in a water funding model. I think that there's some risk to that. Although I support your idea on water conservation, but I think the sewer parcel is different because we voted for a sewer specified area originally on a parcel tax. I think that the real issue around funding for me is the 2021 collision course with the sewer fund running out of money. I think that's our bigger issue, and I think that we've underfunded on those parcel tax, and I think that's a bigger discussion that we need to have as council. So,
good point. We'll just go. Mr. Haldane is at the microphone, but feel free to come up after. Go ahead, Mr. Haldane.
Thank you. I agree that the fee structure that is in place now is probably the way to stick with it. Otherwise, you're penalizing families as well. I mean, people with a bunch of kids that they're struggling in the housing market, a lot of them rent out their suite to try and afford their houses and so on. If you're going to start making it, like you say, Kevin points out, cheaper for people who own vacant lots, vacant properties, vacation rentals, so on and so forth, why should they get something out of the district for a lot less than working families and so on? So I think we'd have to stick with the original plan here, or at least to be fair anyway. Otherwise, you're going to have a big outcry from people who have a tough time affording what we have going on as it is, especially young families and so on. The other thing with regard to infiltration, back when we did the Prestige, if my memory is correct, we put all the stormwater that comes off of all the parking lots and everything in there, including the underground parking and so on. That all goes into, rather than it going out to the ocean where it was supposed to go originally, the stormwater system was put into our sewer plant. So that all goes in, all that stormwater there, and if I remember, Mariners Village as well. So when Mariners Village was just sold, now they're going to be adding on a huge amount of parking area, a huge amount of pavement there. That all goes into that pump station down there. You want to know where infiltration comes in? It's stormwater that comes in whenever we get those huge rains at the hotel in Mariners Village, and that all goes into the system, all pumped through, all ends up in our sewer plant. Well, we should probably maybe divert that stuff out of our pump system and out of our sewer plants and put it back into the ocean where it should be going anyway, and then just have in the ground where you'd have an oil separator and so on where you could deal with that on some level. At this point, I think you're going to run into infiltration problems in the piping system as well. We used Boss pipe, which was not CSA approved, and we've talked about that in the past. But that wasn't just for the big pipe. A couple of the jobs that I've done in the last couple of years, we take the low pressure pipe and we've added onto the system there, but it's non-CSA as well. So you've got a low pressure pipe that's not even designed to take on the pressure that is. It's a non-CSA pipe, the smaller stuff. So it would be my observation that over a period of time, especially 10, 12 years that we've been running the system, that those will wear out twice as fast as a regular CSA pipe. Those could be broken in many places now, and they could be infiltrating, or we could be pushing groundwater, dirt, everything else through the system. So there's a whole bunch more that we have to look at rather than just infiltration out of manhole covers and things like that. We're bringing in water right now through stormwater, so that can be a lot of stormwater when we get those crazy rains in the winter. So anyhow, thank you.
No, it's a very valid point, Mr. Haldane. I think we sort of touched on that. Maybe if Mr. Blackhall has his hand, we talked a bit about there being some piping or broken areas and the like, and that's where added water is entering. Go ahead.
Yep, thank you, Your Worship. And to the speaker's comments, the manholes definitely are a significant part of the problem, and wastewater manager has pictures. I don't know if we can get them on the screen tonight, but maybe sometime during these budget presentations, there's like a major flows coming in there, and it's to do with the system when it's put in place. There's different methods of inspection at the time. Maybe wastewater operators weren't going down right when we're doing a thing called a final acceptance certificate of when we take on the assets from a developer. You need to make sure the wastewater guys are involved in that and that they sign off on everything too, because to me it looks like it's stuff that should have been caught at the beginning on the manhole problems. So anyway, there's that. There's definitely infiltration problems other than manholes, and there is likely storm water entering the system for sure, and there's likely tie-ins that are illegal. And so we're going to be looking at that too, doing some smoke testing. So,
okay. Mr. Howard?
Thank you, Your Worship. I just wanted to add that I'd like to thank Herb Haldane for information. We were a little lack on some of the engineering associated with those major developments, particularly the Mariners Village one, where we never got as constructed drawings and there isn't anybody around on staff to realize what had happened there. So it's something that we will be investigating. Because when you think of the volume of water that could be charging down that road and that through that parking lot, it could be fairly significant. The other issue I wanted to point out, again, we're talking about a 10 or 12-year-old system, and the manholes we've been looking at and the manholes that Mr. Skidmore has identified as being the culprits, it could be due to the majority of them are under a road surface, and I think it's just a matter of things settling and opening up the rings in the manholes. And if you look at some of the pictures, you can see that it looks like somebody's put a 3/4-inch garden hose and opened it up, and that's the kind of water volume we're getting into the manholes. So we're going to embark on rectifying that problem as best we can and when they're identified. And secondly, we believe in some areas of the city that we've got some illegal tie-ins from roof leaders and perimeter drains, et cetera. We're going to do some smoke testing to see if we can resolve that as well. But we've got to get a handle on it because during those heavy rains, we do have a problem at the plant, and it hasn't caused us any significant grief to date, but it's just a matter of time until we get a handle on it.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. Ms. Lurs, you had another follow-up question? Or a follow-up question?
Now a couple. Just with the comment with the stormwater. So with the stormwater, are there different pipes for the stormwater, or does it run directly into the sewer?
Your Worship, stormwater is not supposed to be integrated with our sewer.
But in some cases, though, you think it might be.
It sounds, when we hear about the Mariners of the Prestige, we'll be looking into that. But during house construction, and I'm not talking about in the last 5 or 6 years, but prior to that, there may have been illegal connections from roof leaders into our system, and we're trying to track back and get that resolved as well.
Okay.
So where does the stormwater go then?
Stormwater in developments is engineered to go into a stormwater system to an outfall, whether it be a creek or the river or whatever, but not to our sewer system.
So some of it flows into swales, though, into different ponds.
Yes, we have subdivisions that have retention areas, or we have subdivisions that we're able to have natural flow into creeks and streams and things like that. But I know in some of the older areas of town here, we do have water flowing illegally into our system, and we're trying to get a handle on it.
Okay. And another question I have on that was in regard to paving. I know that in the city, there's an extra charge if people pave their driveways because the water is now running into their systems, into the sewer systems or their stormwater systems. So trying to I checked into that.
Sorry, I don't understand.
Well, if somebody paves their driveway, then there's more water running down the driveway, running onto the road, running into the storm sewers.
Okay.
The storm pipes, stormwater pipes. So if the driveways were pervious, so that
Right.
so that the water could go through, that wouldn't be the issue. So that the paving causes more water.
Oh, I
Just
see.
like what you're talking about with Mariners Village with paving and that sort of thing. So that's another something to look at, is looking at different ideas rather than paving, because that's what happens. The water runs down. It's just a comment. And what was the other one? The other question I had was in regards to what Mr. Pearson said.
Councillor Pearson.
Whatever. Well, I know you are. So undeveloped land, do they pay sewer taxes
Yes.
if they're in the sewer area, even if they don't have water? They pay a parcel tax.
They pay a parcel tax.
The same.
Yeah, but if you're not, like, if you're zoned to have like a large parcel with one house, you would only pay one parcel tax, right? But then if you've subdivided, then you would pay accordingly. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Okay. I just wanted to check on that. Okay. Thank you. But with the parking, you know, Souk Harbor House, with their parking lot, they put in the rubber mat sort of thing and that sort of thing too, so that the water would go through.
They have grasscrete, and that's same as like the Co-Harborside housing and the like have grasscrete. So then everything is absorbed, and then all the chemicals are sort of broken down by the ground.
Right, and I think that's something maybe the district should be looking at, and more responsible, and maybe dealing with that water, and also reusing the water. When we're talking about putting in the sewer system, the whole issue was putting in two lines, one with the sewer system, and the gray water coming back and being used for flushing toilets or for watering. And that never happened, unfortunately, because that could have happened. The hole was there, and what would have just been another set of pipes coming back. So we should keep that in mind when we're doing more developing and things like that, to be more responsible with our use of water and waste. I mean, that can be a benefit. They used it in Duncan. They were making cubes of soil. What was it? I forget what it was. But they used they composted the waste, and they made cubes, and they were selling it in the stores. I don't know what happened about that, but there was an operation. So there's different things we should look at. We should be more creative. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Lors. Anything else from anyone? Okay, just 8:30, folks. Just saying. Sort of said 9. Mr. Blackhall.
Okay, so maybe we've gone through the overview slides, and now I would go through the overview of the actual numbers and get into the departments for the 2 staff members that are here, so they can cover their areas tonight. So this is the actual, what people refer to as the budget itself. First page, table of contents. Oh, can I rotate this thing? Hang on a second. Not good. Not good. There we go. Okay, so this is the actual bylaw. So we were talking about on the overview slides, the main areas. This is what we have to, by legislation, report out on. Other people choose to have their bylaw in a very detailed manner. And that gets you into trouble if there's overages and underages, and we have a line, for example, other purposes. That enables us to come to you and request a transfer from one line to another without having to amend the whole bylaw. So that's why it was planned years back to be in this fashion. Okay, and also on that page is where the funding comes from. So by percentage, obviously, majority of it is property tax. The next page, and this is kind of the main page. This is like a summary of the whole document itself, and I'll make it bigger just to show you the lines. I don't know if we can see that. It's just big. There we go. So funding sources, taxes, 7.6 million. You can see the amount of the non-market change number. So that's the new taxes from new growth in the area. The overall impact of a 7.3 million on the previous year is a 2.5% increase. Then you get into the parcel taxes, 1.8 million. You'll see that when we get into the sewer budget page. The other sources we talked about of 5.5 million, this is a breakdown of them. This is the first line is really just we get grants in lieu of taxes, utility taxes, other things. That makes up the 253,000. Any grants that we were going to get for projects, that's where it shows up here in the budget. These are more the bigger grant monies. The 1.2 million is like the gas tax funding, et cetera, casino monies. Investment income. Then if we borrow, that's a source of funding. This is where it shows up. So we've got planned borrowings for 2018 of 460,000 and in the sewer fund of 750,000. Those numbers can change, of course, but that's just what's reflected right now. And then amortization is an expense, doesn't have a cash impact, but it needs to go in the budget. So it's on both sides of the revenues, or funding sources and expenditures. Fees and charges, you see, is another line in the bylaw, and that of 1.7 million, and it's broken out on these areas. And then if you go back into the budget document, you'll see the page that details it even further detail. And then we get it. So the total of all that, and including transfers from our own reserve funds of 3.9 million, the total of all that is the 20,500,000. And then you get into the expenditures broken out again by bylaw area, the first being debt servicing, and the budget forecasts debt servicing number of just over $1 million. And capital expenditures, so general government, which is everything other than the sewer fund, 3 million, and then sewer fund 1.4 million. Transfers to reserves, so these are expenses, so it's money we take in and transfer to a reserve. And then we've got each of the departments' areas broken out sort of by function, so council, CAO's office, HR/office admin, corporate services, financial development, community safety, amortization, and sewer operations. So, and that's your total. The next page is a breakdown of the debt servicing for general operations. And I'll go back to the previous page. You'll see that we had 306,000 for general government and 97,000 for the fire department. That's broken down on this next page. So you can see how much of the principal and interest for each of those items, and it'll come out to the 97,000 and the 306,000. The bulk of that is the loan we have. That's the MFA loan for the property purchase. It's actually being funded by surplus, so not taxes. And you'll see down below here is a breakdown of how that debt is serviced, like what funds pay for it. Okay. Further down on that page is is a breakdown of the transfers to the reserve funds, the 1.8 million. And you can see all the different reserve funds and how much money is going into them. The only one we kind of have, some control on is, the capital asset replacement reserve. That one basically is recommended additional the minimum per bylaw is the town center revitalization bylaw that has a formula in it. That's why that number's there. The rest of it is truly up to council to decide how much to put into it. It needs to have a balance going into it as the rainy day fund for the capital assets. And you see when you look at the reserve pages further in the budget document, you'll see the 5-year changes for each of the reserve funds, money in, money out. Underneath that, the transfers from our reserve funds, so how we're paying for capital and some operations from the reserve funds. The one I want to highlight on here, the very last, transfers from surplus for operations. Never ideally that we're using surplus money for operations, but what happens is the budget to actual document that you all have and we'll bring forward to a council meeting again soon we go through that, or I go through it line by line. what didn't we spend this year that we'd planned to spend, make sure we don't tax people again for that same item, that surplus gets rolled into the budget, and that's that number. So that's almost 300,000 of, I wouldn't call it savings, I would call it sometimes savings. Some could be excess revenues. You'll see it if you look at the building permit line, for example, in the 2017 budget to actual, it was higher than our budget. That becomes part of the surplus, but then there might have been a line that was over. And the net impact of everything is that there's this amount of money that we can spend on operations from last year's budget number. So it helps reduce the taxes, but it isn't something that you really want to budget for going forward. Not sustainable, kind of, is what I'm saying. If the budget really works, if we really truly do all the projects we list in the budget and spend to the budget number, there isn't going to be a surplus each year. So,
in the perfect world, that would be zero.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay. There was a question, I believe, or a comment. Councillor Casper, please.
Yeah. Why isn't the emergency snow removal and road repair listed as a reserve fund?
Through your worship, it is on this line, transfers from reserves operating snow removal. We are pulling 10,000 out of that reserve in the budget for 2018.
Yeah. So when it was set up, when Councillor Parkinson and I were on council at the time, it was done to set $150,000 into a fund. And the rationale behind that is because each year, as part of the road maintenance contract, there was $150,000 always added to the cost of providing that service for emergency snow removal and emergency road repair. So instead of doing the in-out each year, we decided, okay, let's just do a reserve fund so that it's a item that can automatically be tapped and it can be set aside. So you never lose or potentially lose that minimum of $150,000. So is that your understanding of?
Through your worship, no, I wasn't part of that history, but that's good to know, and I can adjust so it maintains a 150,000 balance. If you look at the screen right now, you'll see yeah, that's right. And we're planning on spending 10,000 basically, if needed. It would come out of that reserve for issues, plowing that we need to do, et cetera. Main Road does most of that, but we have our own parking lots that need to be done and other sidewalks, et cetera, maybe that Main Road isn't doing. So you can see it goes from 160 down to 130. So we can make sure it's getting some money back into it so it's maintained at 150.
Anything else from anyone on these pages? Anything from members of the public on these pages?
Hello again. At one time in the past, we developed a affordable housing trust fund, and there was monies that were put in and out of there over the years. I don't see it on here, but it's my understanding there's not really much left in the fund.
I think it's a case where it's still growing more than things are out. But Mr. Blackhall, where would we find the affordable housing fund?
Yep, through your worship. If it isn't listed on the reserves page within the document, I've got some of the ones that we're not actually using are rolled into this final area called other reserves. But I've made a note, see our financial statements, because in the financial statements, one of the notes, it has all those reserves, and the housing fund was it for one time actually part of the community amenities and then pulled out again separately so that we can actually know exactly how much. I believe it's a little over 50,000, in between 50 and 60,000 that's in that fund. And it's, added to $500 per door sometimes of a development will go into there. We haven't spent anything out of it yet. And there's also the seniors housing fund, and you'll see that in that one actually does show up separately in here, and that one's that one we stopped funding this year, and it's $250,000. So there's kind of the two housing-related funds.
Anything else, Mr. Haldane?
So if monies are transferred out of a fund for any purpose, do they get paid back to that fund eventually, and do they get paid back with interest through the chair?
Yep, through the chair. If depends if reserve, as Councillor Casper was saying, that is supposed to be maintained at a certain amount, would require then a transfer back in the next year to be funded either by, I guess, a grant or property taxes. In other cases, it doesn't necessarily go back in. Gas tax, for example, is a project-specific fund. We get approximately $540,000 a year, but that consistently comes in, and then as a project gets finished, we pay the bills. That money comes out of that reserve, but then money goes back in. It's constantly changing, but it doesn't have a required minimum balance. So a reserve that had a required balance would be one, I think, that you're referring to, where we would need to make sure we put the money back into it. Housing may have a stipulation on it too. If we're going to help fund a certain development, that we also then replenish that fund by some other means.
Okay, and the DCC fund, every year there's usually a report done, usually in May or June or something, about where monies were spent and how much is in the fund and so on and so forth. Is that forthcoming this year?
Yeah. So through the chair, the ministry used to require a separate report, and now it's just part of our financial statement. So it's a note within the financial statements every year that shows how much came in, how much went out, and that serves the purpose of the legislation. So there's no more separate report required by the ministry.
Is it itemized to the DCC bylaw, though, so we know that specific funds were allocated for roads and improvements that are part of the DCC bylaw?
Yeah, through the chair, that's correct. It is by DCC type. Roads, wastewater are listed separately, and they also are in this this document. The reserves within the budget. At the end, you'll see the DCC ones here: road and wastewater, and so you can see it. Roads, we're sitting at the end of 2016 a balance of $2.2 million. Sorry, end of 2017, $2.2 million. And then we have some, the money coming in is very hard to predict. It really is timing that's out of our control. But on average, say a couple $100,000 going in there per year. And then whatever we spend that are actually DCC road related projects, which isn't too many. That's why I'm suggesting we as staff bring forward a report to council that relooks at what roads are considered to be DCC roads.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Parkinson, then Pearson, please.
Through you, Your Worship. Under the transfers to reserve funds, it shows the seniors youth facility for the $50,000 this year, and then there are no more monies going into it. I was just wondering why.
I think that was sort of answered, but it was because we were going to fund it put $50,000 in until it hit $250,000. So I think that'll be a conversation then, that do we want to have that continue then? But initially, I think the resolution was that it be $50,000 for 5 years, and then this is our last year. Okay, Councillor Pearson.
Yes, thank you. Through the chair to the Director of Finance. So, because we're talking about the sewer parcel tax, what's the current gap between the pull from the sewer reserve fund, and the funding that we're collecting from the parcel tax now? And I guess why I'm asking the question is that, maybe it's better to do the planning for 2021 now to increase that parcel tax. I kind of want to have that in the back of my mind. So what's that current gap, and what's the number of parcels that we're currently collecting on?
Through Your Worship, the sewer fund, which we may not get to tonight now, but it's in the document here. It's closer to the back of the document. You can see the amount that I've sort of had to assume would have to come from new fees, unless we increase the borrowings, is the second line up on the revenues, the 95,000. That would be a new fee. That would be new revenues that are required unless we change the amount of the debt. I wanted to get to that. We do have approximately 1.7 million of debt servicing room. So it's not like we don't have the ability to borrow. It's, no one likes incurring debt, but instead of looking at the parcel tax adjustment, it's an option. So whether or not the parcel tax rate is sustainable at that number, I think, is the question Councillor Pearson's getting at. And I would say it needs to be higher, personally, if we're going to make sure we're funding the capital projects sustainably.
So, and thank you for that. That's exactly my point. Is that for me, I would rather prepare for that now, and maybe we have a moderate increase instead of waiting till 2021, so that we're planning for that starting in 2019. So I'd like to have, and maybe you don't have the exact numbers. I'd like to know what that number is, and then projected growth by the number, because we've been adding, through the last 3.5 years, we've been adding to the sewer specified area, which is increasing the number of parcels, but it's also increasing our costs, as Mr. Skidmore said on the other side. So I guess I would like to sort of, is there a perfect number, and making that option, because I'd prefer that myself personally. I don't know what other councillors think, as opposed to getting into that borrowing room. Thank you.
Yeah, and through your worship again, the number. Sorry, I forgot to answer part of your question. I believe was 3,600-ish. I'll come tomorrow night, yes, with the exact numbers and the numbers that are in the budget. So.
And I just wanted to give you the sort of the heads up that through the chair to you that I'm going to be asking that question in the next couple of days. Thanks.
Okay, Councillor Casper.
Well, I think, I can't speak for Councillor Pearson, but I think what he was driving at was how much of an increase in the parcel tax or the sewer generation charge would it take to not use the $295,000 that is coming out of the DCC fund to retire the capital debt from the original borrowing? Because that wasn't part of the equation when the people voted. They voted to pay $495 a year in parcel tax and then sewer generation charge to pay for debt retirement and the operating costs, period. So it's become abundantly clear that as the operating costs grew over a 10-year period, there was roughly a $300,000 shortfall. And that's why the money was taken out of the DCC fund as a way to pay the bill as far as the annual charges on retiring the debt without increasing the parcel tax. Because, let's be honest here, there was no political will in 2012 to jack up the parcel tax to reflect the almost $350,000, $400,000 increase in the operating contract with EPCOR. That was the reality. Nobody wanted to do that. So the lawyers said, and the province said, well, you can take this money out of your DCC. Well, it's now haunting us by that decision. Nobody had the guts to jack up the fees where they should have been. Let's not kid ourselves here. So now I think I'm glad Councillor Pearson raised it, because that's a reality that has to be seriously addressed by this council, and hopefully this council can do it. But future councils are definitely going to have to do it, because there'll be no money in the pot to do anything.
Well, I think an incremental increase, I'd rather see us do a gradual step as opposed to, I don't remember what we're paying now. It's $550. It's $550 now, so it's gone up from $495 to $550. And so you want to see, it's the same as property taxes, holding them at zero, and then suddenly we're facing with increases. So it's easier on households if it's incremental, as opposed to, okay, now you have to pay $100 more because of years of not doing that. I think is a better, but what that increase looks like, I'd like to know. It's a gradual one anyway.
And
I guess.
Councillor, my mind's gone blank. Parkinson has reminded me on numerous occasions, going back to even when the referendum started, that the public was told your costs are going to be $650 a year in parcel tax to build this system. And it was a $19.8 million system. When it ended up getting built, it became a $23 million system that got built and constructed, and they had a huge revenue shortfall. So they got over $2.5 million from private developers, upfront cash, to help pay for it. But on top of that, they never raised the parcel tax because it wasn't politically expedient. And so, the thing was seriously underfunded from day one. And, I think it's critical that the people who are on the sewer system fully understand that. That, you know what, they got a cheap deal in the beginning, but the cheap deal can't last any longer.
Well, I think with and I'll go to Councillor Parkinson, is that with the amount of people that have moved here now, many may not even know that there even was, it's part of moving into your home, you pay your sewer fee, and this is what it is. And all that background is history. Councillor Parkinson?
So, through your worship, so during that time it was the referendum. So, as it was being laid out, it should have been $650. But they decided that the people wouldn't vote in favor of it and the referendum would fail. So it had to be under $500 to make it go. So that's why it was put at $495. So that is kind of deceiving the people that were first on the sewer system. So now, because council at the time decided that it should be a lower fee, does not mean that the people should be penalized for it either, that were first put onto it.
Your Worship, I just wanted to highlight on the screen right now, and again in the document in the reserve section, you can see the wastewater DCC reserve, and that this middle column is the year that it's basically running out. And then the sewer reserve fund down below, it opens with a healthy number because this year there were some planned things that didn't happen, but with the big capital expenditures, and you don't want to drain it all with using this reserve fund, you can see the impact of sort of the way the budget is put together now and how much is coming out of that reserve. And then the sewer expansion reserve is just there we do have a sewer expansion reserve, and you'll remember at a council meeting that we talked about the fee that makes sure that it's going into the future expenditures, not to pay for what the system is now. That's what we have to be cognizant of all the time too, is as we make were the modifications at the plant needed for the existing users or for future users. If they're needed for future users, then it becomes, you don't want to charge that to the current SSA people. So there's that part to always think about as we're working through large capital expenditures within the plant, and that's where the wastewater manager will highlight whether these are what they're needed for. So far everything is just needed for the current plant. None of those costs in the capital budget are things to get it ready for an expansion. That is a separate budget page in this document. So, just before we break for the night, I'll just go back to the very front pages that are the summary documents. So we covered the reserves. The next pages after that are the revenues, and that's got your property taxes, your sales and user fees, government grants, where we're getting them from. The small community protection grant, that is our policing services grant. As we hit larger population, we're going to start losing. We wouldn't lose that grant until we have a 3-year average of, I believe, it's 20,000, not the 15 that's used for determining when you start paying the 70%. So I did confirm that with the ministry. So these numbers are good up until at least 2022 anyway. And then the rest of the revenues, building permit fees up at 400 now. The cost of the department isn't really truly reflective in just the department budget that you see, but fees in them you're not meant to really make a profit on the fees. You're supposed to just be recovering your costs. A lot of municipalities are making sizable amounts from their building related fees and putting them into reserves and things like that. So the total revenues there, and there's two items that I think, they're on the expenditure side, and we'll get to that later. But anyway, these are the revenues. There isn't much new or unusual in here. It's just the increase in the building related fees, just to reflect the cycle that we're in. The rest of the revenues are transfers from reserves, as we talked about just on the other page. And then the others, which is the borrowings and transfers from surplus, et cetera. And then we have, I'm on the capital page now, if you are following along here, page 6, if I'm reading sideways, or 9. These are for the general capital fund of 3.1 million, it's being funded by these areas, so transfers from reserves of 2 million and other of these components, which is, you can see 460 borrowings, 200 from surplus, which is prior year carryovers, and then taxation. So taxation, property tax, that's paying for 3 million of capital projects is 264,000. So not as large as people would think, but that's where it is. And then these are the actual expenditures that make up the 3 million, and they're broken out on these pages of really small numbers. This is the 2018 page, and I think tomorrow evening we'll get started with the these projects, and that's where the engineering staff, Brian, who's here, could speak to the roads program, which is the major real capital expenditure we have in here, but there are many others that council will have questions on, so we'll get to that. There's a page, obviously, for every year, and we'll go through that in more detail tomorrow. And then you get into your departmental pages. So here's the council one. As discussed earlier, the CRD Arts Development Services, that council asked us to explore and see how much it would cost. So I did put that in the budget, and that's this 32,000 in here, and that's the main increase really for that area. CAO's office, the legal and contingency amounts, that used to be, I believe, 150 each, so they've been dropped. And then the other areas, HR, which oddly includes all our property management expenses, but that happens to be the person that is looking after all that stuff. So that's where we have it budgeted. Corporate services, we'll get into that. The corporate officer will walk you through that area. Then financial services, which is the pure financial administrative stuff, the GIS, which I will show you tomorrow night, an example of what goes on behind that people never really know what GIS people do and IT people do, but we can't be here without them. It's a humongous behind-the-scenes kind of work that goes on there. Development services, so this is your engineering, operations, planning, subdivision, community parks is the community spaces, so that's where that all is. And then community safety will be up on Monday evening, and that's policing and fire bylaw as well. It's a large budget, obviously. And then the sewer fund, which we started discussing a bit tonight, but we'll finish that off tomorrow evening. That's basically the budget document itself, and the overview slides support this document. I do have, as mentioned, a bit of a consultation page on the website. Is this how I can get on here?
Just before you go to that, Mr. Blackhall, in terms of presentations from the particular departments, because we have both our engineering and our wastewater staff here tonight, is it necessary for them to come back? We've kind of gone through that. Will council want more detailed information than what's been provided? Like Mr. Derrick? is here, and we haven't heard him present, but we had gone through that relevant section, so it's just how much detail is council actually expecting from staff? And then we had at length dialogue with Mr. Skidmore and Mr. Howard on wastewater. So I'm just thinking, like, because then we have those two departments plus all the others, are we looking at scheduling more meetings? Because those conversations, depending on the detail and public input, is going to push everything else out. So really, given, and I'll speak just for myself here, like we've approved a financial plan for 5 years. I'm just looking at what changes are and see how some things that we didn't get to flow into, because we've received those reports in some regard, and then also knowing that other reports are going to come to council where we're going to then decide, yes, we want this type of washroom, or yes, we want this kind of play equipment, and here's where we're at with the centrifuge and the like. Is it necessary for staff to come back and report again in more detail, knowing that further reports are going to come? What is the best use of everyone's time here? What are your expectations, just so we know going ahead how many nights will staff have to attend to be with us, knowing that they're going to have to come back at a later time anyway? Thoughts? Councillor Casper?
The only thing I'd appreciate getting is just from the sewer operational side, and I know it can't be done tonight, but in the budget, and this is markedly different from when we had the EPCOR contract, is that there's contractors and consultants, and it's one lump sum. And the way the EPCOR contract was structured, and the Appendix A agreement had a breakout for the trucking costs, for the Heartland dumping fees, and other aspects, some of which were pumping costs with the people who did the pumping and all that. So right now, this lump sum doesn't give me much comfort, because I want to get a handle as to, okay, what are our trucking costs last year and projected this year? What are our dump fees based on all the volumes that are being disposed of from the centrifuge? And what about our pumping costs? Are they similar to what they were last year, or is it anticipated that they get high? And you know, you got to know these things, right? But I'm just wanting more detailed information in that fund, because I'm not comfortable with a $300,000 pot, because to me it doesn't mean anything. You know, are we spending $100,000 of that on consultants? I don't know. And what type of consultants? So I'm not trying to make more work, but it sure makes my decision-making process simpler.
Okay,
so that's what I need. Thank you.
So that helps. Councillor Parkinson?
Through your worship, I'm sorry, but I think that the staff should be here tomorrow, so
Okay.
that we can, if they come on first, then it might only be half an hour, and then they can go home. But at least we'll have our questions answered.
Okay. Councillor Pearson?
Yeah, I support that having everybody here, because I think it gives the public the sense of that we're asking the right questions. You know, we approve a budget, and there's a lot of gaps in there. If it's a lump sum, or we haven't made a final decision on a procurement process like the washroom as an example. You know, it looks to the public, oh, we've approved the budget in principle, but we haven't really approved that washroom at the end of the day. So I would prefer everybody to be here. So.
Okay, but we're not getting into that particular detail on which washroom we're going with tomorrow.
No.
Okay, so I just need to be clear that is going to be forthcoming. I think the question is, do we even want to talk about and have more washrooms added into our parks? That would be the discussion, and that's where a lot of this is broken down into quite a lot of detail already. So I just want to make sure we're using everybody's time, not just ours and the public's, but also our staff's time effectively. Councillor Loggins?
The budgeting process for me is more of a high-level overview, and I trust that the managers of the departments have put all of this in place based on their budgeting processes, so I don't need to see all of the nitty-gritty details at this time. I need to see that during the report.
Yeah.
And trust that we have the money in place for when that report comes forward to make sure that we can accomplish the things that need to be accomplished. But, and I mean, we've done that in the past, and we've come under budget in a lot. We've gone over budget in other areas, and that's kind of how it goes. But, I do trust that the managers have done their homework on those costs, and we will see them and have public discussions on them at a later time. So I don't personally require additional information from the staff. I did visit the sewer with Mr. Skidmore and get a tour just in January, actually, and got a lot of this information in advance. So it's nice to have that relationship with the staff as well in advance of the budget process so that we can understand it.
Great. Thank you very much, Councillor Loggins. Feedback from staff? Mr. Howitt?
Thank you, Your Worship. The reason having staff here is they're responsible for their particular sections, and they're the subject experts, and that's why I would like to have them here. And following on Councillor Parkinson's comment, if possible, tomorrow when they're here tomorrow night, if we could have the subject matters like the road report and the drainage report and the other stuff, if we could have that first out of the gate, and then we can deal with it, and then they can leave, and then I can follow up with the rest of the stuff. But just in case there's some nuance or some question that I'm not prepared for, that they would be. So
right. Like a lawnmower.
Like the lawnmower, yes.
Right.
Thank you for reminding me on that. No, but I don't think it's such a particularly bad idea, and I've talked to both staff, and they're available for tomorrow night. So.
Okay, very good. Mr. Blackhall?
Yep. If we could go 5 minutes through. I believe the corporate officer can probably get through her department right now. Before we do that, I just wanted to highlight on our website right now, after the January Committee of the Whole meeting we had, I mentioned that we did put, this is like a budget consultation document, but it has, based on the January draft numbers, not the numbers that we're talking about tonight. I'm going to have to go and just update this slightly. But it does have, you put in your assessment here, whatever it is, say 500 or something, and enter. And then I'll make sure this gets fixed because it's kind of hiding the number a bit there. But you can see your total property tax based on that budget back in January we had, which was a higher tax lift, would have been that. And it shows you where and how it's getting spent overall, not just your $2,000 of tax there. But then it goes into each area and it shows, okay, of that $2,000, 489 is being spent on police services. Here's what is involved in that budget area. Here's the impact of a decrease in funding, an increase in funding, a little bit of stats. Did you know how many calls there are for et cetera? Same thing for fire department. You sort of got to click in there to see the number. Every kind of department, bylaw services, $36, et cetera. So you can see building doesn't cost anything because it's a revenue center actually. It should be cost neutral, but anyway. And then finance, all the areas are on this document, so it will be updated based on these newer numbers. And finally, where we land before we give the bylaw, when we're doing the actual consultation process part in the bylaw, this will be up there and people can play around with it and stuff. So, and then I'll hand it over now. If council wishes to have the corporate officer section done, it could be done right now.
Okay, so just on this, as I mentioned at the open house, our website is being worked on in-house by staff, and this is sort of an online calculator that is being used, and it'll all sort of roll out and be launched on that anyway. Is council willing to hear from the corporate officer tonight on her particular department, seeing that she's here? I know, but since we've gone later, that's just been a request from staff, if we would consider that. She's requesting like an additional 5 minutes. Does that seems reasonable? It should be very negligible. There's really not much change. It's because there's no dramatic change in that department, so you can just go ahead, Ms. Machado.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yes, just to give a highlight to Council, the changes within the Corporate Services Department are very negligible from the previous year. As Mr. Blackhall mentioned earlier, the most significant change is within the salaries and benefits and professional development areas of the budget, and that is because the HR function and bylaw function have been moved to their more appropriate departments where they lie now. All of the other changes within the department are, really between $500 and $2,000 relative to what we spent last year. If we've been under for the past several years, we've reduced it where we could. There's a couple of areas that have gone up. One that I just wanted to point out to Council is the advertising and communications account that may have stuck out for Council as the budget to actual was significantly less than the actual amount that is budgeted. Previous amount budgeted was $30,000. It's gone up to $32,000, but the budget to actual for 2017 was only around $18,000. And the reason for that is that Council made a motion midway through 2017 to start advertising the council meetings. So that was not incorporated into the full amount of the full amount had not been expended for the full year. So anticipating that will happen in 2018, we've retained that budget and just bumped it up slightly to accommodate for that. But just if council had any questions that I can answer, everything else is really just negligible on what our actuals have been over the past several years.
Thank you, Ms. Machado. If council remembers, originally there was just in the Souk News Mirror print ad that said, for information on council meetings, visit our website, which I found to be not really useful information, and that's where we went back to our public meetings, and this is what it looks like. And also we made a motion on how we handle publications and special events, then that we would look at other media sources as well. So I'm glad that you've caught that. Councillor Casper?
Just to put it in perspective, council never made a decision to stop or reduce the advertising in the first instance. And it was, took us all by surprise. We, open up the paper or whatever and just see this ad that meant nothing. It meant absolutely nothing. And it was, in my mind, a complete waste of money. It was like, you might as well just throw it out there in the street for what it cost, because it served no purpose or value whatsoever. So, and it was, I had more comments saying, why do you have an ad there that says nothing? Yeah. And I'm glad that the changes have been made. So thank you very much.
Yeah. No, we caught that. It just will cost us more, but I think that's reasonable because it's actually useful. Councillor Parkinson.
Through you, Your Worship. Concerning elections coming up, you have 3 people working in the department right now. So will you be needing extra help with that, or what is that for?
We're not anticipating at this time. As you're aware, we are down one staff member and don't have a current return to work status on that employee. But we do anticipate that we can do all of the election preparations internally and have everything ready to go. And of course, we will need to hire additional staff for advanced election polling and actual election day, but those are minimal, and those numbers will be coming forward to council at a later date.
Through Your Worship, do we hire the people for the actual election? I thought it was through the province. Yeah, Election BC.
No, they are hired by the district for that day, specifically for the election function.
Really?
Yeah, and there is a election officer rate that is paid for the day, but it's nothing to do with provincial elections.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. Anything else from anyone on corporate services? Okay. Any members of the public wish to speak on corporate services? Okay. So I will call for a motion to adjourn. It's moved by Councillor Casper and seconded by Councillor Loggins. All those in favor of adjournment? Opposed? See you tomorrow at 7, and we have more than double the number of public from last year. So thank you for attending tonight.